With the Big Ten and other college conferences already canceling fall sports, we're likely looking at a January start for the 2021 wrestling season. So, what would that dual meet schedule look like? Let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to another Big Ten Tuesday topic here on the Fanco Wrestling YouTube channel. This week, discussing the realistic season that could take place in the Big Ten dual meet season. So, looking at this, you may be a naysayer. You may be saying that there is not going to be a season at all. And cool, I understand if you do. I like to look on the positive side of things, and I like to look and speculate at what could happen. And if the NCAA came to me and said, Fanco, we need you to save wrestling. We need you to come up with a plan and put it together so we can have a dual meet season for the Big Ten. This is what I would do. Now, the first thing I looked at, as we talked about it, is I looked at some of the similar protocols between professional sports that are going on right now with the NHL, with the MLB, with NBA, as well as UFC. And there are similar protocols between each one of these sports. One of the first things is that they have these bubble environments. Now, the MLB is one of the exceptions on this. They don't necessarily have a bubble because they are living at home with their families and then traveling into games because their season's so long. But NHL, because they're just doing the playoffs, they essentially have two host cities, two bubble cities where all the teams are traveling and they're staying there, and whenever they're done, they leave the bubble whenever they're eliminated from the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, one of the other cool bubble cities, I guess if you want to call it, is UFC, that's doing their whole private fight island, which is really awesome, shipping guys out to other cities before to get COVID tested and then shipping them into the UFC fight island. Really cool way to be doing things. NHL, I mentioned, is doing the bubbles, and then NBA is actually, they're all in Disney playing their season. And one interesting thing there is they actually have these things that are like distancing bands, which are the magic bands from Disney. And if you're within 6 feet of somebody within too long of a time, within I think a couple of seconds, these things start beeping and going off, so you move away from each other. That's a whole other thing, but just something that I saw that was interesting. Of course, all of these teams are doing temperature checks. They're doing all sorts of things to make their athletes safe. Now, with that in mind, what could happen in the Big Ten if they want to have a dual meet season? Because I think it's important to look at that so we can then implement some things in the Big Ten dual meet season. Now, I want to mention a couple things off the start here before I get into these 9 to 10 things that need to happen in order for the Big Ten to have a season. And then I've put together a schedule of the Big Ten and how it could actually pan out and work with my protocol. So it's a legit schedule and you're really going to enjoy it. But look, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a doctor. I don't know all these things. So I'm going based off of the other pro sports and how I think things could work out. The second thing here is we don't know if the virus will still be here in January or what things will look like in January. So that's the other caveat here, the thing to note here. And I wanted to point those out before I get in. Now, the first thing that has to happen is, I've talked about this in another video, but the Big Ten should kind of split into two different divisions for regular season matches. And so essentially, before we get to championship weekend, each of these conferences should stay in conference to kind of limit things and get the best teams out of each conference. And these are how the conferences would split in half between East and West. This is the most fair, but this is also, which I think is actually real fair, but this is kind of how it's done in football as well. But this would also make things more convenient for travel. Looking from like the longest drive in the East, is from Rutgers to Indiana, which takes about 12-hour drive, and then from Nebraska to Purdue is about a 9-hour drive. And so we're looking at consolidating and keeping those things. Here's another kind of map of these teams split in half between East and West. If you're more of a visual person, want to see that map. So that's essentially what's going on there with these teams. Now, that's the first thing that has to happen, is wrestling in conference. These are the other things that have to happen to have a Big Ten dual meet season. So wrestling in conference only, which is happening. It's likely going to happen, between a lot of these schools. Maybe not in conference, but local competition. That's kind of what the NWCA is pushing for as they look forward to pushing for a January start to the season. The other thing is to have hub host schools. So what that means is those would be the bubble schools, essentially. And you're not going to be able to keep these athletes here for a full 2 months because they have school. Now, if it was all online, if they had all online classes, classes, that actually does kind of change things, because then you can keep these athletes here in these controlled environments, which wouldn't be the worst thing. But we have these hub host schools, which we'd have 4 of them. I'll explain what those are, where those are, and why I chose each of these hub schools in just a minute. The other thing is limiting travel teams. We don't want to have 50 guys traveling with the team. You got to kind of limit who your starters are going to be. Maybe bring a couple backups who may or may not start, or in case somebody gets injured or unfortunately gets the virus, this is who we put in, as well as, the staff and media and things like that. Just limiting all of that, limiting those points of contact, just like they do in the MLB. The other thing is, at these cities, in these schools, you got to have these hotels, which are essentially, limit 1 team per floor to limit those points of contact even further, with food being delivered to them, just staying within that hotel only, except to travel over to the arena where they'll actually be wrestling. And then we can get into all that little minutia, but I'm not going to talk about every little procedure along the way. But just a couple of things I want to point out. Arriving days in advance is something I think that could be important as you look at in question, with these tests, with the COVID tests and temperature checks. So you're arriving days in advance just to make sure you get all that screening and everything, the quick tests before, so you can get in there. And tests are getting faster and faster, to my knowledge. So, but by the time January comes along, this could be really realistic. And then, of course, having temperature checks with your weigh-ins and all that is important. Different tiers of the staff in a very limited schedule. So the limited schedule, this is, I know, what you are really looking forward to, the limited schedule. And just a second as I talk about these hub schools. So with these hub schools, this goes right hand in hand with the schedule. Each week, actually every other week, I'll explain that in just a second. Every other week, there will be certain schools traveling to each of these hub schools. There are 4 of them. The reason I chose these 4 is based on a couple of things, based on large venues, based on convenience to these other schools, because we're going to have each of these teams travel here. I think each of these schools could handle each of these things, as far as, hotels around the area, as far as the venues, as far as things like that go. So that's why I chose Penn State as hub 1, Ohio State as hub 2, Purdue, and then Iowa as hub 3 and 4. So 2 per East and West, where each teams will travel there. So now that brings us to the dual meet season and what would happen there. Each team, we're going to have at each hub every other week, there will be 3 to 4 teams. So 3 to 4 teams per hub per week, each dual meet weekend. And this is the dual meet schedule. This is essentially what would happen here. Look, if it's set in stone that the NCAA championships have to be in March, which, we're set in St. Louis, March 18th through the 20th. If that's set in stone, we just work our way backwards. Big Ten championships are then March 6th and 7th, and then we're able to have that dual meet season from January to February. And, assuming these teams are already practicing at that point, so that's actually a good thing. But the championship weekend would be February 19th through 21st, and then backwards from there. I'll explain how teams qualify for the championship weekend, but first I have to talk about the schedule. So yes, this is the full Big Ten schedule that I put together myself. I wanted to talk about this because I think it is super, it took me some time to put together, it's some headache, but I got it together. So through each of these things, we will have 2 duels per every other weekend. There are 3 to 4 teams per event, and just because you have all 4 teams there doesn't mean you're wrestling every single team at that venue. Some of these teams will run into each other twice at certain venues. I believe Penn State and Rutgers is an example of that, where they'll actually run into each other dual meet weekend 1 as well as dual meet weekend 2, and it's not until one of those they're only wrestling one of those weekends. They're not wrestling twice. So as we look at, for example, dual meet weekend 1, we have Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State wrestling each other at hub 2. All those teams are at hub 2. That's it. That way, if one of those teams gets, unfortunately gets the virus and gives it to one of the other teams, then we can at least, kind of, seclude those guys, keep them away from the rest of the Big Ten competition. But And of course, that's a worst case scenario. Hopefully, that would not happen. And each of these teams then wrestle each other. So you're wrestling every single team in your conference, every single team in your division. So all the Big Ten East schools are wrestling each other. All the Big Ten West schools are wrestling each other. And you can pause that on that schedule, check it out yourself if you want, if you're really interested in seeing all of that, because I'm not going to dive in that every single match, every single duel, but each division will wrestle every single team in that division. From there, we can actually get the seeds, get the rankings of the top 7 schools. So you can rank 1 through 7 in each division. Then the top 2 teams from East and the top 2 teams from West will go to the dual meet championship weekend, and that will be at another one of the hub cities, hub schools. So 2 from each pool. And if you want to look at like last year, for example, which teams would make that, it would be Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, and then Nebraska. Those were the top 4 teams. And then number 1 from East will wrestle number 2 from West, and number 1 from West will wrestle number 2 from East. So that's kind of how that would work out. So if we're looking at last year's results, Penn State would wrestle Nebraska, and then Ohio State would be wrestling Iowa in a semifinals like bracket, similar to college football and how that worked. And that is, I believe, the best way to have these dual meet championships and then move on into the Big Ten conference championships. And look, this is my opinion. I put this together, spent some time thinking about this and how this could realistically happen. I think it's possible that it could go down this way. Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you're looking, I actually put together how to host and how to qualify for the NCAA championships this upcoming season in a very similar manner. If you're looking at how to do that with all of these teams, I recommend the top video. And for other Big Ten topic, you can check out the bottom video right here.